Okay. Okay.
All right, it started.
Now, once upon a time, do you know who the first person ever to say once upon a time?
The storyteller? No.
Aesop.
Aesop?
Yeah. A-E-S-O-P.
Aesop?
Do you think that's a name?
No.
It is. It was Aesop's name. And he told lots of stories. And they all started with once upon a time and ended with a lesson. Doesn't sound like fun, huh? But they were. Some of them were kind of sad. Everybody go, oh. And some of them were kind of scary. Everybody go, ooh. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's all. But all of them tell us something that's important to know. Aesop, A-E-S-O-P, was a very wise man.
He was or wasn't?
So, once upon a time there was a big, black, beautiful crow. Okay? And crow, gaw, gaw. Okay?
How can a crow be for its
And
black?
this crow liked cheese very much. Do you like cheese? You like cheese?
Not too
Yeah,
much.
okay.
I like
And
cheddar.
okay, and this crow was very fond of cheese, and every day she would go out looking for cheese. Now, in the same area, there lived a fox, and he also liked cheese very much, but somehow he doesn't come back home as often as the crow did with cheese. So, one day he would go way out looking for cheese, and he would come back to his lair. You know what a lair is? Fox's house, okay? And his paws would be all sore, okay, from walking all over the place. And he didn't have any cheese, and he would see the crow flying overhead with a piece of cheese in her beak, as usual. And he'd be so frustrated that he would beat his poor paws on the floor, and that would make him cry even more. So one day he thought, I'm smarter than that crow, and I should be able to get twice as much cheese. And he kept thinking, he said, and I'll do it the easy way, and it won't be so hard on my feet either. So he went to sleep. He slept all night, and he slept the whole next day. And he woke up just almost sunset, feeling very pleased with himself. And very hungry too, right? But he had thought of a plan. So he said he was looking up in the sky. What was he looking for?
The crow.
Right. And there she flew over. He said, "There goes the Cheese Express." And he said, he stood up on his hind legs like the cat in the video, looking at the printer. Okay. And he said, "Oh, good evening to you, Mistress Crow. It's such beautiful weather for flying, and you fly so beautifully." Well, the crow was a very vain creature, very proud creature, and she held her wings out, isn't it wonderful? Okay. And he said, "But," he said, "I hear that greater than your flying, more wonderful than your flying, is the beauty of your sharp artistic claws. Please," he said to the crow, "make me the happiest creature in the forest. Please show me your beautiful claws." And so with her wings out like this, not wanting to hold up her wings because she wanted the crow to see how beautiful her wings were. And at the same time, she extended her claws out on the branch like this, and she kept to she was just falling for all the sweet talk that the crow was doing, that the fox was doing. And then he says, "But," he says, "I hear that the most beautiful thing of all about you is your voice. Please, Mistress Crow, make me deliriously happy. Make me wonderfully enjoy every aspect about you. Please, Mistress Crow, make me so fulfilled. Sing for me." Sing? You thought, sing? A crow? Sing? She thought that her voice, like crows' voices everywhere, a kind of, but vanity, vanity. She decided to believe that what the fox was saying was true. She chose to believe that. So she opened her beak, and out came the weird sound. And also out came what?
cheese.
Ah, yes. It fell, and the fox opened his mouth, and he ate it so fast he didn't even taste it. Hello, now.
Mm.
And the crow blinked, realized what had happened, and she realized the lesson of the story is what?
Never
Huh?
sing like that.
Don't sing with your mouth full. But also, don't trust flatterers. A flatterer is someone who gives you all that sweet talk because he's trying to get something out of you. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
This will be a very important lesson for two beautiful young ladies to know as they grow older. Okay? So, now, another story. Now, that was Aesop. Now, I'm going to try somebody else. This next person is Rudyard Kipling. Aesop lived 500 BC, 500 years before Christ, and Rudyard Kipling lived only about 150 years ago, which is not very long now, maybe 100 years ago. And Rudyard Kipling wrote this story. Okay, there was a rhinoceros, and he was much bigger than a Noah's Ark rhinoceros, because he had two piggy eyes, and he had no manners. He was very rude. Okay, and back then, the rhinoceros skin fitted him quite tight. Okay, like a hippo skin, and it attached with 3 buttons on the bottom. Okay, so then this rhinoceros, he lived back in the altogether uninhabited interior of the country, and he was coming down to the water, but near the water there lived this one man, a Parsi. Now he had a cooking stove, the kind that your mom tells you don't touch this stove, right? It's too hot. Okay, so then that kind of cooking stove. And he was allowed to touch it. So because it was his stove, and he was allowed to touch it. So he baked a cake in it, and the cake, it was a superior comestible. That's magic. Okay, and he put raisins and cashew nuts and all kinds of flour and sugar and different things, and he put it in this cake, and it was 3 feet high and 2 feet across. It's a wonderful cake, and he baked it and baked it and baked it until it was all done so brown and warm and smelled so sentimental. Okay, and then he took it out. He was just getting ready to eat it when the rhino came, and the rhino went roar, and he came and he spiked the cooking stove with his horn, and he knocked it over, and he grabbed the cake, and he ate it all. And then he went away wagging his tail and wiggling his tail behind him, because he has no manners back then or before or now or from now on. Okay, and so the Parsi was very unhappy that his whole cake was gone. So he said, "Those who take cakes that the Parsi man bakes make dreadful mistakes." And there was a bit more to that than you would think, because a week later there was a heat wave. We had really hot weather here recently, right? Very hot, like that, worse than that. Great heat wave came through, and everybody went down to the ocean, to the water, like you have the lake here. You know, everybody went down to the water to cool off, and everybody was taking off all the clothes they had and jumping in the water. And the rhino, he took off his skin and unbuttoned it with the buttons in front and left it on the beach. And he went and he just went rawr to scare everybody else out of the water. And he was out there, but because he has no manners, remember. He never had any manners, and he never will have any manners. So he just scared everybody off, and he was lying in the water and blowing bubbles through his nose. Okay. And when the Parsi saw the skin on the water, and the rhino was by the skin by the water, and the rhino in the water, he had a big smile on his face. It was such a big smile that it went all the way around his head 2 times. And so he grabbed the skin and he took it home. Now he lived in his cave and he never swept out his cave, right? And he ate nothing but cake any of the time. So his whole cave was full of old cake crumbs all over the floor, almost up to his knee, okay? Cake crumbs everywhere. So he got this animal skin, this rhino skin, and he rubbed and pushed and scrubbed and folded into the skin as many dry, stale, tickly, wrinkly, stickly, itchy cake crumbs and a few burnt raisins, as much as it could possibly hold. Then he put it back by the beach, and he climbed up in a palm tree to wait for the rhino to come out and put it on. And the rhino came out, and he put on the cake-filled rhino skin, okay? And then, if you can try to imagine what a rhino without the skin would look like, okay? But anyway, he tried to put the rhino skin on, and he buttoned it, and it itched like cake crumbs in bed. Did you ever try to eat something in bed before you went to sleep?
Yeah.
And when you woke up in the morning, there were those dry cake crumbs were in the bed. Okay, it was like that, only worse, because it was lots and lots and lots, and it itched and he said, ooh. And so he went over to the palm tree, and he rubbed and rubbed and rubbed himself against the palm tree, and he rubbed so much, so many times, and so hard that he rubbed this big fold over his shoulders on his skin. But that wasn't helping him, and he rubbed on the other side, and he rubbed and rubbed and rubbed and rubbed against the palm tree, and he rubbed and rubbed against the palm tree, and he rubbed and rubbed against the palm tree, and he rubbed a big fold on the other side. But his stomach was itchy, and he rubbed against the palm tree, but he rubbed so hard that he rubbed the buttons off. Now he couldn't get it off. And he rubbed his backside against the palm tree, and he made big folds over his hips. And it made no difference to the cake crumbs. They were in there, and they tickled and scratched and itched. And it made him, he was horribly scratchy and terribly itchy, and nothing he could do about it. And so he finally went off back to where he lived in the uninhabited interior. And the Parsi came down from his tree, and he took the stove and he set it back on his legs. And that's the story that explains why, right up till now, rhinos always have a very bad temper, and they have big folds in their skin, all because of the cake crumbs inside. Good. So, third story. Now we're coming up. James Thurber. James Thurber. Now we're going to tell you another story about a crow. There was this male crow who he saw a Baltimore oriole. Now, a Baltimore oriole was a prettier bird than a crow. He saw this Baltimore oriole, and he said that he thought she was a pretty cute chick. Okay? And he decided that he was going to woo her. So he went to his house. Well, he was a married crow. And he went to his wife and he told her, I want a divorce. And she gave him one by handing him his hat and showing him the door. She said, you'll probably discover that she can't cook or sew or do anything. If you would see that, if you would look in a dictionary, they tell you the crow is the most capable bird. Ah! And he said, jealous woman. And he tossed her a few coins. He said, buy yourself some finery. You look like the bottom of a teapot. So anyway, he went off looking for her, and he found her with her latest gentleman friend, he took no notice of the fact that the gentleman friend was also a Baltimore oriole. And he started to plead his cause, or should we say, caw his pleas. He said, he said, I'm bigger and stronger than your gentleman friend, and I have a larger vocabulary than his, and my voice can be heard for miles in case of danger. And she said, I don't see how that could interest anybody except another crow. And she said to her boyfriend, come on, sugar. And the crow said, sugar? And the boyfriend said, "Yeah," he said, "I am sweet and I am refined." And he tossed a few dollar bills to the crow. He said, "Buy yourself a blazer or something, Mac. You look like the bottom of a coffee kettle." So anyway, the crow decided that he would go back to his wife, and he went back to his house, and he found a note pinned to the front door. It said, "I've run off with Bert. You'll find some arsenic in the medicine cabinet." Ah! The lesson of the story is, even the llama should stick to mama. Okay. Okay. So that's a story from Aesop, and that's a story from Rudyard Kipling, and that's a story from James Thurber. Okay, and all of these guys wrote other very interesting stories. From Aesop, you can read about the dog in the manger. You can read about, and the most famous one, you know, from Aesop is the hare and the tortoise, the rabbit and the turtle. He's the guy who made up that story. And people have been telling that story now for 2,500 years, and he's the guy who made up the story. Okay, and then Rudyard Kipling wrote the story not only about that I told you about the rhino, but he wrote the story about the camel and how the camel got its hump. He wrote the story about the boy who was raised by wolves out in the jungle. Jungle Book, okay, and the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities, you know. Okay. And he didn't write that song, but he wrote the story. Okay, and then that's Rudyard Kipling. And James Thurber wrote the story about the unicorn in the garden, and he wrote a lot of other very funny stories about the tiger and the wolf, the tiger and the leopard that decided to have a boxing match, and all kinds of interesting stories. So
A leopard and a tiger had a boxing match.
okay, now if finished here, there's a poem, a story poem, and this is by Lewis Carroll. Have you heard of Alice in Wonderland? Okay, Alice in Wonderland.
We've
Okay.
seen the movie.
He made, and this poem is inside Alice in Wonderland. Okay. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright. And this was odd, because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had no business to be there after day was done. "It's very rude of him," she said, "to come and spoil the fun." The sea was wet, as wet could be, and the sands were dry as dry. You couldn't see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. There were no birds flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. The walrus and the carpenter. I'll be the walrus and the carpenter. You get other parts pretty soon, okay? The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If it was only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the walrus said, that they could get it clear? "I doubt it," said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "Oh, oysters, come and walk with us," the walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. We cannot do it more than a 4 to lend a hand to each." The eldest oyster winked his eye, and never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But for young oysters, Rita, all eager for the treat, their clothes were brushed, their faces washed, and their shoes were clean and neat. No shoes, okay. But this was odd because, you know, they hadn't any feet. They were oysters, they didn't have any feet. Why would they have shoes?
They could fly.
And 4 more oysters hurried up. And then another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock, conveniently low, just like this couch, okay? And all the little oysters stood as you, okay? And waited in a row. The time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings. But wait a bit, the oysters cried. Say, wait a bit.
Wait a bit.
Okay. This is great. Before we have our chat, because some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat. No hurry, said the carpenter. They thanked him much for that. Say thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
It seems a shame, the walrus said, to play them such a trick after we made them come so far and made them trot so quick. The carpenter said nothing, but the butter spread too thick. A loaf of bread, the walrus said, is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar besides are very good indeed. And now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed. But not on us, the oysters cried. Say, not on us.
Not on us.
The oysters cried. Turning a little blue, we'll make you do that. Because after such kindness, it would be a dismal thing to do. The night is fine, the walrus said. Do you admire the view? I weep for you, the walrus said. I deeply sympathize. With sobs and tears, he sorted out those of largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. Well, oysters, said the carpenter, we've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again? The answer came there none. And this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten everyone. I couldn't fit you inside the stomach, so I just had to do it temporarily. Okay. That's it. End of show.